Okay. All right, welcome to the Law and Licensing Committee on this beautiful winter day. Apparently with our current system, we just push your speak button and then you can speak.
It doesn't go red, though.
Mine does.
I get to control the meeting.
You could use mine if you needed to. I'll put
It
it here.
works.
Okay.
Hello, hello. Yep,
Oh, it does, just lights
Just
up.
red. Yeah.
Welcome to the Law and Licensing Committee. My name is Carol Lear. I'm the representative from District 7 and all the children of Utah, Park City, Salt Lake City. And welcome to those of you in the audience, some of you who are helpful presenters, some of you are just helpful attenders. And we don't have a very long agenda. That will probably make you happy, makes us happy. So I think we will start by once again introducing ourselves. Mike, do you want to start?
Mike Haynes, Board Member, District 11.
Jenny Earl, District 1.
Cindy Davis, District 9. Brittany Cummins, District 6.
Thank you. Up here. Kathy? Go ahead, Angie.
Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy and Staff to the Committee.
Kathy Helgeson, Committee Secretary, District 5.
So we have five agenda items. One of them is a time certain at 3 o'clock. So and one of them we've already discussed quite a bit. So like I said, I think this will be a pretty efficient meeting. So we will start with, and I'm in the wrong place, of course, on my computer. So we'll just start with item number 7.1, Board Waiver of Administrative Rules Amendment. And this will sound familiar from yesterday, and we'll just ask Angie Stallings to introduce this.
Yes.
Or
Great,
talk about
thank
it.
you. You'll remember we discussed this rule last month, right after the committee had listened to Union Middle School's request for a waiver. And the biggest changes were that we're taking a section of language from 419 and moving it into this 121. So it's essentially everything that starts at about line 68, if you'll remember. And that's because we had waivers that were for 2 or more days that were in 121, and then the emergency waivers, school closures due to emergencies that were in 419. So now we've taken the language from 419, put it here, starting at line 68. And last month, as the committee was discussing this language from 419, the recommendation was made that the superintendent handle all waiver requests due to emergencies, emergency school closures due to snow, inclement weather, or other emergencies. And that then only those that potentially are denied by the superintendent would then come to the full board. And so we've made that change. You can see now that the superintendent now has the ability to grant waivers, even if it's 2 days or more, whereas before it was 1. And then if you look at the language on lines, starting on 105, that's where we've inserted this appeal right for an LEA whose request has been denied by the superintendent.
And, right, and this was the one that Michelle caught some just language errors. So there's a few other just really what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of some content, or not so much substantive, but non-substantive, except for one of them, kind of as a better clarification. So,
Yeah.
Any questions or comments? Am I supposed to look for you? Go ahead, Jenny.
I guess I have just a question. I'm just thinking, is there any situation where we would want it to come to the board? Or, and I guess along that lines, will these be on consent calendar when the superintendent, do you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to think, how will we know frequency, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
If there's a
Maybe
fire.
Angie can speak to that.
So
part.
currently, when a waiver is requested for just the 1 day, they are not put on consent calendar or anything. It's simply an email or a written request of the LEA. And then Sid herself, she reviews it. She works with our AAGs to review it and make sure that she has the authority in accordance with the rule, et cetera. And then she provides an answer. But no, they haven't ever been
So
on
in the
consent
emergency
calendar.
situation,
Just in the
though-
emergency situation, right. So
Yeah.
anything that's for a non-emergency would still come to you and come to the board.
Right, okay.
Do you feel okay about that?
Yeah, I was just, I mean, I
You're
guess
just
we'll
thinking
hear
if
about it
there's-
on the news then, right? If there's something that's really big that they can't go.
And then
Right.
the LEA would be responsible for the makeup day. They would track that.
Correct.
Oh,
Well,
not necessarily.
Well, they usually have a plan. When they provide a request for a waiver, they usually include in their plan either to, so if they've got contingency days built into their schedule, they probably
Just
don't
use-
even need to request a waiver. It's
Right.
only when they are going to dip below the 180, or in the case of Union Middle School, where they were going to dip below the minimum for a school day. We have a defined, I think it's 4 hours for, you have to hold school for at least 4 hours. And remember, they did split sessions, so they were just under the 4 hours. So, and I don't know, they usually, in order for you all or the superintendent to grant their request for a waiver, they have to submit their plan for how either they're going to make up, how they're going to meet the 990 hours, for example, or why they're not going to meet the minimum school day hours. So there has been an instance I am aware of where a district did request a waiver due to an emergency that was not granted, and that's, well, number one, it wasn't just for one day, and I guess the second thing is you could argue it wasn't really an emergency. It was more due to construction timelines and, not opening on time. But, so she hasn't received too many, I will just say that she's granted. And even, because you've all have, up until now, received even those that are 2 days or more, they're not very frequent because they truly are due to, a weather or other emergency situation.
Cindy, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say in the case of Lake Mountain not starting on time, they wrote to her and requested a waiver, and she said no. And so they went back to, or said, that's not going to work. They went back to the drawing board and came up with really a great plan, a hybrid model where they brought kids in for certain portions and then other kids for other portions. And then they did online, all the teachers put all the curriculum on Cactus, and it worked out great. And I think she used great judgment, and I support this.
Can I just one clarify?
Sure,
I
please.
think in that instance, though, we also determined it wasn't something she even had the authority to do because it was for more than one day and it wasn't a quote-unquote emergency. So I was using that as an example, but in a lot of ways, I think she said to that school, you'll need to make your request to the full board because it's more than one day and it's not. Yes, they did. And they ended up not coming to the board. Yeah.
I'm remembering, this is a question I have. I thought R277419 required, and I can't remember required or suggests, which doesn't sound like rule language, but that the LEAs build in contingency
yes.
days. But I don't know that they all do. Do you have any more information about that?
That's a good question.
don't review
And it
every
is still
schedule.
in here,
It is
in this
still in-
language. It does say that
Online?
the superintendent may grant a waiver due to excessive snow, inclement weather, or other emergency without board approval. If the LEA has provided contingency school days and hours into the LEA's calendar as required in 419.45, or has another plan in place to minimize the negative impact on the educational process caused by the waiver. So as a reminder, last month, we only had the language about the days and hours into their calendar, but then we added, this committee asked us to also include some language, which is the blue and green on 79 and 80.
Yeah.
Because like in the example of Union Middle School, it wasn't about the days, it was about a portion of their building being lost, and so then they did the split sessions, so it's not always about the 180 calendar days, sometimes it's about the length of the school day or other. So, and I apologize, so it is in there, I do not know how many of them don't, You may remember that one year we had quite a bit of snow, and we had, I want to say, 3 or 4 LEAs that came and asked for waivers, and some of them had snow days built in, but even they had to call more snow days
Right.
than they had anticipated. But I think there was one school district that didn't have school days worked.
I recall over the years, and I can't remember if it goes back 4 years or if it goes back 34 years, but that there have been some districts who, despite the rule, have not built in those days and then have to come to this, and not wanting to add contingent, either extra school days, they chose a waiver over adding school days, which kind of troubles me. But I guess given your comment about superintendent's judgment, which I also trust, maybe I'm just okay with that. Did you have another comment?
I had a question. Would the chair entertain a motion?
Please.
I move that the committee approve R277-121 Draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
And the motion is that the committee approve R277-121 Draft 3 on first and final reading and forward it to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion from the board members? We've beat it up enough. Does anyone in the audience have any concerns or questions about that? All of you? Okay, thank you. Then, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Unanimous in the affirmative. I thought about, and this is after the fact now, I'm wondering if at some point, I'd like to consider just 2 things, and this is after the fact of the motion, but I would maybe like to have some criteria in place, even that the superintendent drafts herself, that says these are the factors I weigh in granting or denying the motion. I just think that might be helpful going forward. And then secondly, these discussions seem to be about days, not hours. I keep wondering why we waive this rule instead of re-examining the rule. So just maybe talk about that.
Yeah, and one thing a bit on the second item, we do have a number of staff who are working on ideas, concepts, policy changes related to competency-based education and personalized learning. And there are some changes they've been working on to 419, for example, to change language a little bit. But there is a long-term plan to look at this over the next year or two, especially as we're getting better and better with competency-based education and establishing standards, competencies to demonstrate knowledge and to somehow move away from the seat time and the hours and the days, but moved more towards measuring student achievement as well as the LEA's success as an instructor or providing the instruction, to not be so seat time or time-based. So along with that, I think would come a recommendation or maybe a freeing up of being able to be so tied to the 990 and 180.
And yeah, let's see what
Yeah,
develops.
so they're
and-
working on that right now.
Okay, I am old-fashioned enough that I'm still a fan, especially of the 990 hours, but I've been beaten up over the head enough for a lot of years to say maybe the 180 days isn't required, but we'll see what develops and then talk about it. So on that, we are moving to item number 2, which is, it's actually 7.2, external research request. And Whitney Phillips was identified as our assistant, but there you are. I didn't even see you come in. I saw David,
up.
but do you mind joining us and talking about this? Whitney? Did you expect that? You look shocked. Oh, sorry. Let's see, you don't have this.
Yeah, I've
It'll
got
be
it
on-
up there, right there.
Yeah. So it's,
So you need to go back. That's
back one, did I go
just
too
the
far?
agenda, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
external.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to talk to us about this, Whitney,
Sure.
please?
Whitney Phillips, Chief Privacy Officer. This is a request that from Dr. I'm going to not say it, from a person that works for the ETS. This person ran into some of our USBE staff at a conference and just kind of informally was interested in this. And they sent them through this process to request this data. I reached out to USBE staff, Darren Nielsen and also Jared Wright, asking them if they supported this, and they both responded that they were neutral. And so I didn't put that there was a USBE sponsor. So any other questions on it?
Do you want to speak to, I mean, is this a time-consuming, laborious thing? Is it not too hard? Can you speak to that?
I think I can guess at that. I believe that the data and statistics burden would be fairly light because these are data elements that it won't need much cleaning and manipulation of data, but the burden would be on the investigator, the researcher, to look at that data.
So, and it is de-identified student-level data, right?
It is. It's student level so that they know that which students were interrupted and what their specific scores were, but they would be given a number instead of their SSID or name.
Okay. So, any board member questions for Whitney? No? No? Cindy, no? I think we'll, okay,
So
please.
where is the researcher at?
The researcher is located within ETS. I believe their headquarters is
Oh,
New Jersey.
Well, okay, that's what I was wondering.
Oh.
I guess the closest, I wasn't familiar with where they were located, so. Yeah, I don't love giving de-identified data, but it sounds like it's primarily scores linked to what their gender and their, what is it, special education stat, right? I mean, very specific things. It's not other locations, that kind of thing. Well, I guess it kind of is though, right? School and district. So you wouldn't give any of the students that where there's a 10, 10 or less, those students would not be included in the stat, or they would?
They would be included.
They would be included?
Yes.
He would just be careful how he reported those?
He would be receiving data that does not have any kind of end size suppression. And so if it's possible, but very unlikely, that a person in that community school would be able to identify that person. It gets a little less possible, but still somewhat possible to re-identify students at his level if he really, really wanted to.
Okay, I guess that was just
That
what
your
I was thinking there. so,
concern?
Okay.
Any other thoughts, questions? Cindy? Board Member Davis?
I'm a little bit torn on this. You know, I had a principal call me to his office day before yesterday and showed me 4 years of progress in their test scores. Increase this past year. Major decrease. He said, we got calls from our testing director in the middle of a section saying there are problems, everybody stop. He said we had students get to the end of a section and then told, oh, you have to retake the whole thing again. He said there were so many problems, and he said I had to take this data into my faculty on Friday. And then he started crying, and I felt so bad because he said in 23 years, this is the best faculty I've ever worked with. And they feel about this big right now because of this situation with the data. And so part of me thinks, what is this could this data be used to actually maybe prevent this from happening to others and make it so it's a better scenario for other students and teachers in the future? But if not, I mean, this is the same company that we had the problems with. This is the parent company of Questar. So what's the real end use or motive? I don't know, and maybe I don't even know. I don't
I
know.
didn't think it was the parent company of Questar.
ETS is the parent company of Questar.
I didn't know that after all this time. It could. On the other hand, Cindy, even as you were talking, I was thinking it could also work in our favor to be able to use it as an explanation, documentation of this is why it's important to have enough money to hire a good provider, because obviously this has considerable consequences for the faculty, not to mention the reputation of the school and the community. So it could have that
And
positive.
just to follow up also, just a follow-up question. Questar was part of one of the 3 levels of analyses of all the data that they determined to be valid, which also is owned by ETS. So is this superfluous after what they've already done? Is another question I have.
Do you have any opinions about any of that, or?
No,
Okay, you don't have to.
I try not to have opinions.
No, that's not a good thing. Because we rely on professional opinions, so, at least I do. So does anybody want to make a motion other than, I guess I don't see this as, I can see if you dig deep enough, it could be harmful. I usually see more information and more research as a good thing. It's my typical opinion, so. Did you have a comment? Anybody else? Brittany, did you want to say something? You're just debating, never mind.
Would it be possible to get some more information from this individual? Because it's hard to tell. So is he looking for, are the results that he's looking for to help inform future tests or future problems out there? Because he says, in the first question, it says, what statistical methods are optimum for most effective detecting impact? And so is this useful research that he's going to provide publicly to others? And so maybe it might be helpful to get it, maybe ask a question as to what the long-term impact is, their benefit to us as a state from the results of his research. Okay.
Thoughts?
I can speak to one thing that I had in correspondence with this professor, or this doctor, and what it was is an interest in looking at the methodology that's best used, because the technical term is called missingness. I know, it really is. The technical term is called missingness of data. And and so when a student is interrupted in these sessions, in these testing sessions, and it's missing, I think the interest of this doctor is to look at what statistical methodology would be most useful and most accurate in looking at these types of situations, because this is unique
When they do occur,
when they do occur.
Okay. So,
not as like a preventative, but analyze it afterwards.
That's how I understand
so
it.
in other words, he's recognizing that this is something happened in Utah. Let's use this as an opportunity to understand how best to measure this. So if this happens again in other states or places, we have a better tool to recognize disruptions. Is that okay?
Yes,
Makes sense.
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, and I can even see how and this could benefit Utah as well. Data like this could be used if there are lawsuits based asking for what are the damages for this kind of a breach or a problem. And then a state could use this kind of a study to say, here were the, I'm really speculating, but here are the, here's the downside for breaches in at least one state. Yeah? Or no?
I would say that this problem wasn't necessarily a breach. I
Right.
think it
That's
was
good.
just a dysfunction.
That sounds like not the best answer I've ever heard.
Okay.
Michelle? I think you're supposed to come up here to speak, so you're on the record. Right.
Michelle Buse, Assistant Attorney General. If you have concerns about the use of the data with the ongoing legal issues with Questar, perhaps it could be granted at such time as there's closure to that matter. I'm just trying to address I'm trying to read in what your concerns are, and maybe I'm reading beyond what your concerns are.
That's a thought. Anybody, are those, anyone's, they were not, I hadn't really thought of that concern, but,
What's the timeline? What are we?
We aren't going to go to mediation until March.
huh. So that's a while.
Yes.
Does anyone feel strongly about,
want, and we'll give you your data.
Mike? Okay. I will entertain a motion of someone's choosing.
I just think there's a lot of value in the data that they will get from us,
Yeah.
and that right now in the world, data is everything, and so much value is built upon new data that is revealed. And if there's value to them that they would receive, maybe it is a good
won't.
posturing.
Yeah, we won't receive, but.
No.
Yeah, Darren said the psychometric world might be of interest to them.
Uh-huh.
Right.
But not to us, it won't benefit
But
us
I,
personally.
but I hadn't thought about that, to wait until after this is resolved.
I think we should wait. and
I don't
revisit
think that anything's going to change on what happened in the past.
Right.
Right. Or,
And so I wouldn't want to put his studies in a difficult position, but what he's asking for is something that happened in the past and won't change. Am I right?
right.
Well, that's
Is
true.
the data he's asking for, it won't change
No.
in April.
Their analyses of it might, they help do our initial analysis. I think we should wait till. it's
Who do you
all
mean
done.
by they helped? Is
The-
Dr. Sinjay? Or Dr., that's his first name?
Questar.
Sandip. Yeah, Questar did the analysis. So I wonder, I'm just curious. Yeah, that's, I guess I'm rarely in a conspiracy mindset, but it could be that looking for those kinds of concerns for mediation.
I did share with Brittany that in our experience in working with Questar, ETC purchased them rather recently. In the
ETS.
big, or ETS, in the big picture of the world. And they have not been real involved in backing or supporting Questar throughout these programs, or when Questar was seeking help to have more resources to be able to meet the contract. So there hasn't been a real strong interaction with the two companies as companies up through our interactions with them. But I can't speak to how they are now,
Yeah.
because we don't have any further.
But if I hear you right, it's
Communication.
what you're saying, you don't think that there'd be any surreptitious reason for
Might
for
be wanting.
ETS.
No, I'm thinking it might be ETS wanting to look at the viability of Questar and the impacts that what they are able to do, positive and negative, on
Evaluating.
the education environment, what's going on, what can we do to make this better?
Possibly.
But
So
Go
I
ahead.
just want to make a motion. I
Please.
think we close out, I think we wait till March or whenever we've closed out the relationship, and then we consider this at that point.
Okay.
I think we finish it out, one thing before we,
And well,
yeah.
of course, mediation won't put the end to it, won't be the end to it probably, right? We don't know.
We don't-
So, let's.
so revisit it in March. is
So
kinda
can
what
I
I'm suggesting, so.
revisit in March or after the mediation is
April.
concluded? There's a mediation report for us. So, Brittany?
Why don't we not put a date to it, but just as soon as
Mediation.
whatever is closed out with.
Questar
yes.
contract is resolved.
Yes.
The
Yes,
issues
that's a
related to the
better way.
Questar contract
My
are
my
resolved.
motion is wait till the Questar contract is resolved.
Right, okay, so the motion is that the board, and it will be assigned to a committee again at the point that the Questar matter is resolved for reconsideration, or for consideration. And that's the motion. Anybody in the audience, or any board members to speak to that motion? You've kind of already expressed yourselves, there's not a lot of us have an opinion. And anybody in the audience wants to speak to that, has any concerns? Okay, so I said the motion, all in favor? Aye. And any opposed? That's unanimous as I heard it. So thanks, Whitney.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is 7.3, LEA third-party provider contracted services. And I think, Dr. Voorhees, you're up for this discussion.
And I can give a little bit of
And
background
Angie.
as she's coming up.
Okay.
Just as a reminder, back in October, when we first started discussing, or we began the discussion of the third-party provider contracted services issues that the audit committee had reviewed and our internal audit staff had provided. You remember that draft document. The committee had about 8 questions that day, and you'll remember last month we addressed 4 of them. And one of the questions is listed in the background, which was from USBE monitoring staff, do we have the information that is needed to fulfill USBE's responsibilities, monitoring responsibilities or reporting responsibilities, probably to the state and the federal government? And what examples of USBE's auditing what are examples of USBE's auditing and or monitoring responsibilities? So that's just the background of why Leah has come, as you probably all know, and she can introduce herself and what she oversees. You know that most of the programs, especially that have federal monitoring requirements, the staff report to her. So she and her staff have a lot of experience in this area.
So, please add to that if you'd like.
Thank you. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. So I actually came to the State Board of Education 11 years ago to be the state and federal compliance officer. That was something that I had a lot of passion and experience with. So for the past decade, I've been supervising the special education monitoring in the building, and then the last 2.5 years, all federal monitoring, except Title 4A and Title II. Those take place in teaching and learning. So I wasn't in your discussion last month, so I'm not privy to where you were, but let me just quickly show you the documents that I provided for you to try to help answer the question that's in the agenda.
And would this be the second or third document?
So both of them, just really quickly. The document that has the 3 columns, the UTEM Program Improvement Planning System Compliance Monitoring and Mentoring Activities is probably going to be more useful. But let me just give you background on the other one.
Do you want me to disconnect, or are you okay
No,
with me projecting?
this one.
Do you want me to have this one up for now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So actually, it started 4 years ago. The Finance Committee requested that at the time, Glenna Gallo was the Special Education Director, and I put together a cost-benefit analysis of what, in order to accomplish the monitoring activities required for special education, and we spend a good $1 million a year on monitoring just for special education for programs, and then another $500,000 probably on fiscal monitoring. So the Finance Committee asked us to put a cost-benefit analysis together of what it would cost to have all of the monitoring happen with USBE staff versus the practice that we had at the time of having the majority of monitoring happening with contracted staff. At the time, the Finance Committee was asking almost all sections of the agency to do cost-benefit analyses of different projects and initiatives. And that's what led to all of this work that I did, which doesn't necessarily answer your question, but that's the context and the background of how I started creating this, okay? The monitoring that is required in special education, according to federal law, the state education agency is responsible for the implementation of special education. The end. Like, we're responsible for ensuring that local education agencies provide those services. And if an LEA is not providing the services, we have to do it. It's called general supervisory responsibilities, okay? And so we have 5 major categories of general supervisory responsibilities in IDEA. And one of them is related to the annual performance report that I bring to you every March after we submit it on February 1st that goes through 20 indicators of whether or not we are compliant with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. In order to create that report to send to the feds, we monitor LEAs to ensure that they are compliant, and therefore the real question is that we are compliant because we are responsible. We have the supervision responsibility for implementing IDEA. So we monitor LEAs so that we can report that we are actually compliant on those 20 indicators, and you will see those in a month and a half because we're submitting our report again in 2.5 weeks. So several of those indicators require 100% compliance. You have to be exact. We review IEPs, individual student files. We interview staff to make sure that they understand the requirements. We do student focus groups to make sure that kids understand their rights and that they're getting services. And we interview parents to make sure parents understand their rights and that they feel like one of those 5 important responsibilities is that parents participate in the process. It's a fundamental principle of the IDEA. So we interview parents to make sure that they are participating in the process. And we also survey them annually, parents across the state, because that's one of the indicators of implementing the IDEA is that parents feel like they have meaningful participation. So those are the types of things that we do that meet the category of monitoring for the program. Then we also do fiscal monitoring, which you know more about because we've been talking about it more recently. We look at all of the different requirements for using federal grant money. It's from the Uniform Grant Guidance. It's not specific to special education. Any federal grant has to follow the grant guidance. The person who's paid with the money actually works in the program is basically, you know, the summary of the 500-page document. If you're paid with that money goes to the program. Okay, so those are the 2 monitoring responsibilities. So when the Finance Committee asked me to do a cost-benefit analysis, and about halfway through this is the cost-benefit analysis is when Glenna went to Washington, and so I finished this up. They had several questions, which in the document that you don't have up talks about the background, talks about the assumptions, and the conditions. And I've just outlined all those for you. So the major question, besides what it costs to do monitoring, is the monitoring effective? Are we compliant because our process is getting us the information that we need from LEAs to ensure that they're compliant? Because we're the ones on the hook, right? So the document that you see in front of you, the activities, the major question that came up from those discussions about having third parties do the monitoring versus having FTE do the monitoring besides the financial question was the consistency. The consistency of the message. So if USBE has a contract with someone to do something that USBE is responsible for, do they do it adequately? Do they do it to the extent that we would do it? But when it came to the analysis that Glenna and I did, the fundamental question was contractors don't always have the same understanding that staff do. And because we in our office don't directly supervise them, we don't always know that. And how we did figure that out was hearing from LEAs. Well, so-and-so was in my LEA and looked at an IEP file and said that this was wrong, but it's my understanding that you're supposed to do it this way. Who's right? oh, okay, well, let's talk about that. That was the number one question that came up about contractors. The number two question was about trust. And that's, so you can see, I'm just going down that list, cons of using contractors, about trust. District staff were less inclined to be interested in having charter school staff or individuals who had worked in charter schools most of their careers come into a district and do monitoring because they felt like that the scale was quite different and that they didn't understand the scale of a district. It didn't actually work the other way. I didn't get charter school staff saying that they were bugged by having someone who had retired from a district come and monitor them. I only heard it really the one direction. So I mean, those were really the issues. So when I presented this to the Finance Committee actually recommended that we bring FTE into the building to do monitoring, which was the more expensive option, to address the issue of message consistency and the fact that we would actually be supervising the people who were doing the work, and to address the issue that LEAs would trust USBE staff more than they felt like they would trust someone that had retired from a charter school or even from a school district, but because the majority of our contractors are retired special ed directors. And so the Finance Committee recommended that we bring on 2 additional FTE, which was more expensive. And we have, and it's worked very well. But to be honest, I don't think that was I think the thing that we did that made the most difference was not actually bringing on more staff. It was reorganizing the way that we trained contractors. I think that has made the most difference in consistency of message and in LEAs trusting contractors. Because monitoring can be high stakes. You know about how high stakes fiscal monitoring can be. Program monitoring is not high stakes in that way, but it feels that way to teachers. It feels that way to, yes, it feels very personal, and it feels personal to superintendents and charter school and charter directors who get a letter from us saying you have high risk. That feels very personal and feels like they have not done all that they, all the time and effort that they have spent providing services to students is not recognized and is not good enough. And so we've spent an enormous amount of time getting all of our contractors with LEA staff. And this is really the big difference that we did. We brought LEA staff in with us to train everybody together. We made all of our documents considerably more explicit and brought LEA staff in with the contractors to review them all, to make sure we all knew what every one of those words meant, that we were all on the same page, that this is what this line right here looks like in an IEP. I think that's what's made the difference. It's not that it's a contractor versus FTE.
Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt,
No,
but
please.
it might be helpful for the rest of the discussion. I mean, literally the next things you say. I was confused, and I'm still a little uncertain. I'm still uncertain about whether you're talking about monitoring only in special ed programs, or is that just a microcosm of monitoring generally?
Okay, great question. So I'm still at the point of giving you the background of how I got to answering your question. But I can answer your question very simply now by saying, as a result of what we learned in this process, answering the question that the Finance Committee asked us to answer, we have then taken that process to all federal monitoring. So
okay.
yes.
Yeah.
So we learned all this information just in special education.
I see. But you can extrapolate
But
it
now.
other monitoring.
Right, now we are moving it into monitoring across
Oh,
the
good.
agency.
That's what I was trying to understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I will make an exception. Title III monitoring, the work that Christelle has done has been independent.
Yeah.
And now the rest of us are learning from it.
Okay, so it's more sort of more touchy-feely monitoring, kind of? Is that?
Well, she's really looking at instruction.
Okay,
The instruction in buildings for students learning English. And we do, for special ed monitoring and for title monitoring, we do observe classrooms.
I see.
To make sure in special ed that students are getting the services and supports that, I mean, I sit in a room with an IEP to see if the student is getting the services and supports on the IEP, right? So we do monitor that.
Okay.
But the process that Christelle is using has even taken it further, and now we are learning from that process and scaling, and ours is getting better because of hers.
And all of this is instructive to all federal monitoring of the title programs that you identified, not a couple of them you said.
Yeah, everything that I supervise.
Yeah. Okay. I had one more question, and then I'll just see what committee members have. You said that there's, like, what we would say in the law is strict liability, but 100% compliance.
Compliance.
But when you say that, you don't audit, or maybe you do, every single IEP. You audit a percentage of them?
A percentage.
A sample.
Yep, we
So it's
audit a sample.
100% compliance of those that you audit?
Of the sample, yes.
Okay.
But if an LEA is small enough, so we do a statistically significant and statistically representative sample. So in all the small LEAs, we do 100% of them.
You may look at every single IEP?
Yep.
Okay. All right, those were my clarifying questions. Other people have comments or questions? Board member comments?
So this is specific to federal monitoring, and I think the question originally was a little bit more broad than that of just monitoring in general. And so do you feel like the lessons that you guys have learned through this process as well as the other title programs, do you think that anything that you've learned can apply to monitoring generally? And if so, is it possible to kind of work together so that monitoring of a federal program might have some of the information that would be necessary for other types of general monitoring? And could they be done simultaneously with the same people involved?
So, yes, but, okay. So as far as fiscal monitoring is concerned, we're already moving into using what we have learned to monitor state programs already. So fiscally, we're working with financial ops and working at monitoring across. Okay? As far as programmatically, yes, we are sharing with each other, and we can continue to share with each other. To give you an example, there's monitoring required for the elementary counseling program, right? So there's monitoring required. It is quite different and very specific to the elementary counseling program grant. So having the same people go at the same time could certainly work, but not looking at the same thing. And to give you, to remind you, and we did share this information, but not all of you probably were there at the time. But 2 years ago, to really answer that question related to federal programs in general, we did a pilot and combined monitored special education title programs, except the two I was talking about that are in teaching and learning, and child nutrition in 3 LEAs 1 year. So we put all our documents together, and that's what Superintendent Dixon was talking about yesterday when Michelle won the Employee of the Month award. Michelle was the queen of that pilot program. She really coordinated the effort to do that combined federal monitoring in these 3 LEAs. So we put all of our documents together. We made sure that everything that any of the three programs, that all three of the programs needed, that only one person got a hold of and was responsible for. Anything that two of the three programs needed, only one person was responsible for. So the LEA didn't have to submit, 3 times, and different people didn't have to look at it. We all went the same time. And then, and you heard Superintendent Dixon say yesterday, and then we did lots of surveys about how it went. And superintendents and business administrators loved it. And principals and teachers wanted to destroy us. Because having that many people in their building was so overwhelming to them. To be able to look at all the documents, see all the classrooms, interview all of the people that we needed to meet the requirements of all the programs was really overwhelming to a school. At the LEA level, they really liked it because the business administrator only had to talk to one person, only had to provide the documents to one person. So our pilot taught us a lot about where we might need to go next, but our principals really did not love that. So if we're going to continue down the path of doing combined federal monitoring, for which there are a lot of pros, we need to do it differently. That process, just intentionally combining 3 separate processes, was not good enough to not be overwhelming. Does that answer your question?
Oh. It does mine. Did anybody else have other? Oh, yes.
Do you need support from us for changes, or is this just for information today, but would this be a good time to express if you need?
No, it's an action item. There's an
The two, is it the hiring the 2?
No, I did that already.
Okay. That's what I thought. That's what
The
it was.
committee
Yeah,
may
I did
make
that
a
2
The
years
action
ago.
item is,
The committee may make a motion to direct staff to create or amend a board rule to create a request for an appropriation
That's
for
right.
additional resources, or to work with the legislator on a bill file.
that's right.
Board Vice Chair, that's such a mouthful. Vice Chair Cummins.
So the basic question is do we have sufficient resources here at USBE to do the monitoring that's required both federally and state? And so I guess, we've seen some efficiencies that special ed has put into place and other federal monitoring. And so I guess the question is still there do these programs feel sufficient? And obviously they're funded through the federal money, but are there other programs, and do we need more resources for monitoring, or do we feel like this is something that we have a handle on? Is that correct? That was the question, is that?
And I just, if this is your question, Brittany, I'll just speak to this, and Leah, Angie can add, but the special ed people that you've hired with, and I'm assuming all with the special ed dollars,
All.
can only do special ed work.
Yes.
So they can't help with the other federal, but, and so my question was similar, just going from this sort of pilot program, which is certainly something, and it sounds like you gather data along the way. How many more people, how many more FTEs would we have to,
So
do you think,
yes,
a guesstimate?
we really need 3 in student support.
3 more?
Yes. So we need 2 more people. So this year has been very instructive in helping us to understand where our gaps are in supporting LEAs in compliance. The majority of it fiscal, but programmatic compliance as well. This has been a hard but very good learning experience year for that. We have so many little programs in student support that the legislature gave us an appropriation and an assignment, and in most cases, some administrative funds, but the administrative funds cover some evaluation of that program and all the processes it takes to send money to LEAs. They don't cover, is the program being implemented the way it was intended, the monitoring function. So looking at all of those programs, and I think for Scott, I made a list. I think there were 11 on the list. Yeah, we pulled that up. We really need two more people. If your question is, are we adequately and appropriately monitoring the implementation of the programs for which you are responsible, in student support, we need 2 more people. We also need another person in federal programs. There is no more federal administrative money to do that. We use the cap. Federal grants have a cap of how much money you can spend on administration, and the rest of it has to be spent on students, which is great. But the number of, so we have identified 3,500, almost 350 schools for targeted support and improvement in Title I, which we don't monitor, but can provide support for. We have all the schools in turnaround, the 38 schools who've been identified for comprehensive support and improvement that do need monitoring. We have programs like the elementary school counseling program, the school-based mental health, we have school safety, all those little programs, the Carson Smith Scholarship Program, the after-school program, 21st Century Program. I'm trying to think of all the ones I put on that list, that we're using the admin funds to implement the program and to disseminate money. We are not using the fund to monitor the implementation of the program. And then federally, we've hit the cap of administration, but with that many schools identified for needing improvement, we have a twofold need. We have a full-time monitor for Title I programmatically, Val Murdoch, and we have fiscal analyst, Tammy Long. But there's an enormous amount of data that has to be monitored to ensure that our identification is correct, that our exit criteria is correct, that schools get the data that they need to demonstrate the growth that they want to make, and then the monitoring related to that their plans meet the criteria that we outlined in our ESSA plan, that they're making progress on their plan. Our federal administrative money does not account for those activities at present. We really need another person to help with that, and there is no more federal money for that. And I can't use special ed money for that, as you said.
You can't use it for
Especially,
Carson,
yeah,
even
like-
Carson Smith monitoring?
Nope.
So did that answer your question? Angie was going to add something, I think.
So Leah, I was just trying to check back in some emails where different staff here at USBE were talking about where do we see shortfalls as far as monitoring staff. And I actually could only come up with 7.5, not 11.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's the list I sent Scott.
Yes.
Oh, the other one, the huge one is 504 plans. We have zero monitoring going on for 504 plans. We provide technical assistance.
Being on the ground, I can know that's true.
Yes, we have no monitoring going on. Because it's not federally funded.
There's no money for it
There's
at
no
all.
money. There's no
But you
money
just have to
attached.
do it.
It's a requirement, but there's no money attached.
Right.
So that,
So now I'm understanding this is a bigger issue than special ed.
Correct.
And you're saying we would need, ideally, we would want a board rule that explained this monitoring process for the public and for LEAs, and we would want to open a bill file or request an appropriation from the legislature. Is that right?
it would be super helpful.
Okay.
Probably the appropriation for this staff.
Yeah.
Mostly.
That's that second part, super helpful.
Yes.
Okay, so, yes.
Question, so on the requests, the business cases that were submitted, there was one from Dr. Estrada in regard to the the T word.
TSI.
TSI, and so
For
is that.
students learning English.
So is that one of
No.
those, or you're saying one in
That's
addition
for technical
to-
assistance,
okay.
yes. So we are not required to monitor TSI schools.
schools.
We're required to do all the data analysis. So one of the people, one of the three, the two for state programs and the one that's for state and federal, would help with all that data analysis for TSI. But that particular business case is related to providing technical assistance to those over 200 schools identified for TSI for students learning English.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make one more comment?
Please, yes.
So this is the last thing. I was just looking on our business case tracker to find the actual amount for the FTEs, and I just found it has not, I think that Scott and others are still working on it to formulate. So it's listed on today's tracker, but you see it's right there at the bottom, USBE monitoring capacity, and it says pending and to be determined. So I don't think we've completely finalized the amount of if it's 7.5 or it's 11 and what that cost would be. So that's probably why you're hearing a bit of a mixed message. I don't think I was completely prepared, and I apologize. We should have. But now I think this gives you some background when likely next month or at some point we'll be presenting this business case for the additional monitoring capacity, that you'll have the background on what's gone into making that determination and coming up with the why, or how many and how much.
How much is pretty crucial.
Can I add one
Please.
point?
Yes.
And I think it was a question that you asked either earlier this morning or yesterday about, I think it was you, about also providing technical assistance, not
Yes.
just providing monitoring. So the one of the other things that we learned, which we knew previously, but we started taking data on, was that when we have monitors who have the knowledge and skill to simultaneously provide technical assistance, we get better outcomes. And I have data in special education. We don't have data in the other departments yet, but I have data in special education that demonstrates that a significantly greater proportion of LEAs who have high risk, when we monitor them, determine they have high risk, and then re-monitor to see how they are doing. When we have provided them with technical assistance in the interim, their risk decreases.
Really
And
helpful.
we have data to support that.
That's really helpful. Kind of a follow-up, well, I have two follow-ups if nobody else, speak up if you have questions. Is this something that you've just invented, or the USOE has invented, or the USBE office has invented, or is this something that most other states do, some kind of a,
So all other states do the monitoring.
Right,
Right,
of course.
because, starting with my explanations required. Until 2.5 years ago, when Glenna went to Washington, Washington did no technical assistance, only did monitoring. And there are several states in the nation, states and territories, that they have two separate departments that do monitoring versus technical assistance.
because they're rich, right?
And philosophy,
Okay.
right? That somebody who tells you you're doing it wrong is
Yeah.
not the best person to tell you how to do it right. I completely disagree
Oh, that's
with the
interesting.
data that I have, completely disagree. It's more supportive to have, in my opinion, with the data that I have, it's more supportive to sit by a teacher and review the IEP with the teacher and say, look, this isn't correct, and this is why it isn't correct, and this is how you correct it. And have the teacher say, oh, thank you very much. That's so helpful. I will do it right next time. Okay, all states and territories do provide some level of technical assistance. Few have a system that is as robust in marrying the monitoring with the technical assistance as ours. We've provided a lot of collaboratives to support to many other states, showing them what we do, why we do it. I think I told you when I presented in June, I had 16 state directors come and visit in May, where I introduced them to our monitoring and technical assistance process because they were also fascinated with the process that we're using. I've had 2 different superintendents in the last 2 months. One that came and visited us, the Mississippi superintendent and the superintendent from New Mexico, who are interested in the process that we're using and have either come and or interviewed me and staff to really put it in place. So everybody does something. I think we're a little ahead. There are some states that are ahead of us, though. I mean, so.
Great. I'll make a motion, if that's okay. I'd like to move that the committee recommend to the board both a board rule to be written over the next few months and a requested appropriation from the legislature to be decided, but for this legislative session. And that would support broadening this process and making us more effective with additional personnel. So that's the motion. Any discussion of the motion? Ms. Cummins?
Just a technical question. Would we need to make the board rule request to the board, or would that just be a committee motion to bring a proposed rule to this committee?
I don't know if both are possible, or
Yes.
one has to be done, it has to be done one way or another.
You can just direct staff me to work on a board rule. I guess and I apologize, I'm a little unclear, what exactly would we want in the board rule?
On the fly, I don't know that I can just figure that out. Maybe Brittany has some ideas.
Well, more question than anything, because obviously federal monitoring has a lot of standards that are associated,
prescribed.
right? It's very prescribed. And so is this board rule that you're envisioning, is it tying like some of the standards that are in federal monitoring to state programs, or what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And what role do we have in that? Do we have the authority to establish certain standards for state monitoring is just a question, so.
And go ahead.
I feel like we've come full circle, because I feel like that was the very beginning of the conversation we had in October, is number one, whether or not there was interest in potentially codifying or modeling what the federal government has established in their standards by way of monitoring. You know, that's when you'll remember Debbie Davis describing subrecipients versus contracted services and how subrecipients are different than just basic contracted services. And I also remember there was a question about whether we had the authority to do that in rule or whether it would be best in statute. And we probably need to answer that definitively legally. I would say that politically, we probably could make an argument to do a lot of those standards in our board rule, and the question is whether the legislature would oppose that or not, and or whether we would just want some definition changes that would use terms like subrecipient versus LEA third-party providers, because the statute currently, there's a section of code that we reviewed, I think, back in October, that says the state board can require certain things in contracts with third-party providers. And it seems that that third-party provider is such a large, an open term that then people were, people who work on buildings, for example, the construction industry, or landscapers. It was this feeling of it being very overarching. And so I guess that could be either we could minimize it in our definition of LEA third-party provider, meaning we take that definition that's pretty broad in statute and try and minimize it, or we might need to ask the legislature to change that or put these monitoring standards into statute.
And to answer your question on my part, my thinking or my motion was more general than that. It was to say, I don't know exactly what a rule would look like, but I was more thinking of giving notice to, and I wasn't even thinking third-party provider or subrecipient. I was more thinking giving notice to LEAs that there would be monitoring, and I don't know, I'm kind of thinking out loud right now, but the monitoring and technical assistance could be jointly provided, and a request process, and and that the standards would meet either the standards of the federal program that was being monitored, the federal monitoring standards, or that it would meet the state monitoring standards that are, if provided in statute, or a third set of standards that could be more generic that would be developed by the board. I was thinking in more that kind of framework.
Similarly, that is similar to the question that I had, which was, I don't think we need rules in regard to federal monitoring. That's already taken care of in federal law and documentation, et cetera. But my question is even if we're just doing programmatic monitoring of state funds, we don't currently have a standard that says we're going to hold you accountable for these things at the level of the same federal standards that are used. It's just kind of vague. It's up to the discretion, as far as I understand. You can very much correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, unless it's in statute.
And correct. And so there's no statute or board rule that says, okay, we're going to monitor, but what? What are we going to monitor, and what are we going to say in that monitoring process? Yes, no, based on what standard, what definition of what's good, what's bad, et cetera. And so we don't have anything that exists for any state programmatic because each
Programmatic
program has money attached to it. And so that's why we monitor. Is the program being implemented? How is the money being used, et cetera? We don't have any standards for any of those programs, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead,
that's
sorry.
my question is it up to the board to establish those standards, or is it up to the law that authorizes that program to set those standards of monitoring? And that's where my question lies. And so it wouldn't really get into third party unless an LEA is using a third party
Third-party.
provider to provide the services tied to that funding piece.
Which means the rule might cover a couple of purposes to tell LEAs, if you're using a third-party provider for your compliance or for keeping the LEA in line, for lack of a better phrase in the moment, then that third-party provider would have to be willing to be monitored by the USBE.
Well,
Huh? Pardon me, or go ahead.
just a clarification, I don't know that we'd have to put in rule that you would have to be, because the ownership on that data or that information or anything is the LEAs, right? And so if we say we are going to monitor, you have to provide proof, whether it's you get the information from your third-party provider that's providing the services, but they have to be available to USBE monitoring. But it goes back to the same question, is what are we monitoring, right? We don't have any statewide standards that says this is what we're looking for. I mean, the IDEA law is extremely detailed. We are looking for 100% on an IEP. This is what it needs to look like. We don't have anything like that for any of the state programs. Do we need them, and who has the authority to put them? Should it be a statutory, because it's created statutorily, the program is created statutorily, should those standards be there? Or do we have the authority to add standards to a program and says, okay, we have the responsibility of monitoring this or being accountable for it, and here's how we're going to monitor? And so that's my question, is where does that lie?
And let me just give a couple thoughts, and Angie obviously has some other ideas, but my thought is that I would think that for the most part, legislators who are implementing programs, running bills to start programs, if we had a board rule that laid out some basic monitoring criteria, that legislators would welcome, and their bills could say, this program shall be monitored and a written report submitted to the legislature consistent with the board's monitoring criteria. The other thing that I thought was, I was thinking a little differently than you were, Brittany. I was concerned about providing information to LEAs about, we're going to monitor you and this is what it will look like. So that we don't just come in and say, we're going to monitor you, but rather the LEA knows what to expect in the criteria that are offered. But that's.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Right, but who has the authority to say this is what we're looking
And
for?
my thinking is that if what I described in terms of a bill actually saying would be monitored, and I would think what legislators would be relieved to say, if I trust the monitoring criteria established by the board, I don't have to make it up for every single bill I run. And so I would think the bill would design those criteria, but also look to the legislature in at least a consulting fashion to say, do these do it for you for garden variety programs? And I think the board has the authority to do that, but the legislature generally would be also giving authority through common language in a bill. That was my thinking of it. Cindy?
Oh, well, I was just thinking, what we monitor typically, I think, is inherent in the code or the program. I mean, especially in the realm of restricted versus unrestricted funds. I mean, that one's pretty straightforward, but that's a big monitoring piece. But in the case of what you were mentioning before, when we say to an LEA, we need this information and you need to get it from your subrecipients and third-party providers. So what we've heard from some of our monitoring staff is that when they ask for that, they don't get what they need. So then I guess our question is, what is the path that we ask for legislation for an opportunity to monitor subrecipients or third-party providers that provide critical functions of schools, like whatever, finances, instruction, those basic critical functions? Or do we determine what we are going to do on the back end if we don't get information to effectively monitor or provide oversight? Then do we just say, well, they didn't give it to us, so we can't do anything about it? Or do we say, here is what will happen, whether it's a withholding of funds or what have you? So I think there are two front end or back end types of things to think about. But I can see the wheels turning in Brittany's mind, so I want to hear what she has to say.
I think Angie had a response to your earlier question.
I'll just say this really quickly. I think unless a program explicitly has, there's certain programs that might have very explicit language about what they expect as far as monitoring in statute. Other than that, I think the board could establish a board rule saying these are our monitoring standards unless they conflict with statute. Then if something conflicts for that program, then obviously we wouldn't be able to do it. But and Michelle Buse may have some other ideas. But in general, the board has very broad rulemaking authority with respect to the programs that are in all of the 53E, F, and G. And so I think if there are monitoring standards that are absent, as long as we don't conflict with the law that's there, I think we have the authority to establish those monitoring standards.
And are you thinking out, or no, I kept looking that way. I think, I agree with you. And I think that, but I'm equally concerned that we let LEAs know, not just here are the criteria, but here are the procedures, so that they're prepared when maybe mitigating some of the experiences you had in your pilot program of the principals feeling overwhelmed. Maybe. Brittany, go ahead.
So general monitoring standards, I guess my question though goes back to the comment that was here that said that, well, the third party won't give us the data. And what has been the pushback? Is it like, do you need the data? So if there is a requirement, a board rule or a state law that says, LEA, you must provide us this point of data, have we ever not been able to get that point of data?
I think that it's more been that the LEA has said to us, our third party won't get it.
Right.
Provider won't give us the data, and/or the data that they are wanting to provide is not of the standard that we're expecting.
the
I'm
detail.
guessing, is that correct?
So we've had LEAs say our third-party so by law, you LEA are required to share this data with us and we don't have it.
Or our third-party provider has it, and we've asked them and they're not giving it to us, and
Right.
so we're out of luck.
And it's usually because the contract wasn't probably written in a way that gave the
Forcefully.
LEA the strength. That's
Right.
an overgeneralization of my impression, and I feel badly because I think the people who know all of these details, and I don't know, Tammy, if you're familiar with any more details, because a lot of this came out in audit committees, and at that time wasn't attending them, but
So I
My
think we've
impression.
had this conversation before.
I feel like
which-
Groundhog Day a
yes.
little
And
It
so,
is almost Groundhog Day.
yeah. And so I guess my question then is we keep saying that we should seek the ability to get at a third-party provider instead of strengthening our relationship with the LEA and saying, you must, you shall provide us this data. And then the responsibility is on that LEA, that any contract that they enter into, they know their requirement to the state or to the federal government, and they are responsible for that contract, because I think that's where our responsibility lies. And so as we talk about rules and accountability, then it doesn't muddy this water of who's responsible for what, because it's the LEA's responsibility. Any contract that they enter into, they are responsible for the consequences of that contract.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I am fine about that. I just want it explicitly stated in a rule, even though you're saying you think that it should be assumed, or the LEA should assume that. And I'd say I'd like it explicitly in the rule so that the LEA goes to his third-party provider and says, here's what this R277-402 says, and so I need to get this from you, or I cannot continue my contract with you. I want it to explicitly give the LEA something to rely on in pointing that out to a third-party provider.
So getting back to the original question then is so if we were to ask for a rule to be kind of looked at as far as this goes, it would be specific to setting some basic monitoring standards for all statewide programs. Is that kind of a generic rule that says here's?
Unless there are federal standards, in which case we would use the federal standards would apply, or in case specific legislation has monitoring standards of its own. That's my general concept of the rule. So, are we good with that? Any other board member comments? Anybody from the public who wants to speak to that concern?
or maybe Tammy does.
Maybe Tammy, you're, and correct you, which is fine. Both of you can come up, introduce yourselves, push the speak button, and say your piece.
Yeah, I'm Tamara Daly from the Internal Audit Staff, and this is,
Debbie Davis, Chief Audit Executive for the State Board of Education.
okay, they've been championing very much about the subrecipient monitoring and the need, if there's a need for some overarching.
But we didn't use those words.
No, I'm using them. But that there be some consistent standards even within the state programs. And a lot of that, then monitoring contracts and so forth, you'll have, if you have a federal program involved in it, there are uniform guidance that if money is matched from the state, that it must follow the same cost principles and so forth. But to Leah's point, there's a lot of programmatically, not financial implications with that, which we have often run across in audits, that there is not, there's this thought, or that there is a need for a standardization, even an understanding at the LEA level that these cost principles, even from the financial, but also from the programmatic side, that there be some standards that is, I call it color money type of discussion, that you can't just lend that money, that the money has to follow the same standards, either from the program or the financial side. I hope that
That
speaks to it a little bit.
Yes, I think that answers it.
So yes, there's a need for
but you remind me
statewide.
that in developing this rule, I hope it's something, even though there are some inherent complicated standards or complicated ideas, that we could keep it understandable enough so that LEAs can do what I just described to the third-party provider. See, it says right here, I'm responsible for this, getting this data, and if I don't get it from you in a timely way, then we're both out of luck. So, Debbie, what did you want to add to that? Or to the discussion, if you want to.
I was just thinking, one thing is Tammy was talking, and that's, I think a selling point on standardization is it breeds efficiency and effectiveness. And we already have to use it for some, and it takes a little bit of work. There's an upfront investment to set it up and get it done right, but once it is, you just kind of sail and you're using the same standards for everything, which the more efficiency we can have at our LEAs that would save them time and save us time here, I think that would be fantastic. So I'm a fan.
And one more thought, and this is, may be subject to discussion when there's a rule that is before us, but I really liked the point you said, Leah, about, oh, now I lost my train of thought. I knew I'd do this because it was kind of complicated. Related to, never mind, I'll think when it comes back to me, I'll erase it.
Technical assistance and monitoring.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that. But I also, there was one other thought I had that, about, it'll come back to me in a minute. But anyway, and that may or may not be able to be part of the rule when I remember it, but we can discuss it if a rule is before us. So I can repeat do you have any thoughts related to what these guys said? Any questions of the auditing folks? Okay, then back to the motion that I think I can remember. And that is that I'd like to move that the committee support and pass on to the board a recommended appropriation amount to be decided soon, in the near future. And secondly, that a board rule, we start the process of a board rule that then provides the information to LEAs that we've been discussing and sets some general standards, perhaps for both programmatic monitoring and fiscal monitoring, that are more generic or more general to state programs, acknowledging that there'll be federal standards and that certain legislation might have its own standards. So that's my motion. Brittany, to the motion.
I'd like to amend your motion to add in that in the process of developing this idea, that staff look at possibly appropriate code changes that might benefit this question. So if there are portions of this rule that would actually benefit the whole concept, if they were in code, that those proposals come forward as well.
And I would accept that amendment. My druthers would be to the board to do it as much as possible so that it could be, the board's work and not lend itself to too much political pressure from the outside. But that's, if they're necessary changes, I support that, and or helpful changes. Other discussion to the motion? Any comments from the general peanut gallery? All right, no disrespect. So that's the motion. All in favor? Aye. Thanks. Thank you, Leah. That was really a complicated kind of presentation, so I appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
And thanks,
Thank
Angie, for
you.
what you added, and thanks to the auditor people. And with that, we are on to the time certain, for which we're only a half an hour late. Superintendent Rogers, I was going to say Mr. Rogers, and that wouldn't sound right. Yeah, part of the peanut gallery. Superintendent Rogers, would you like to talk to us about your waiver request?
Okay, Madam Chair and members of the board and Associate Superintendent or Deputy Superintendent. Did I get it right?
It is
Stalling?
deputy, but I would have been fine if
A
you'd
lot
said
of titles
associate.
here.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to talk with you a little bit. We're here to, of course, request a waiver to the rule. And we did receive an agreement from the AG's office, just as we have in the past, and we provided to you a letter and a packet with our justification. Want you to know that we don't reach these kind of scheduling changes quickly without much discussion and debate and dialogue. And but if I could, Madam Chair, just point of personal privilege, just express from an LEA standpoint, because I think you don't hear it often enough, that we do appreciate your leadership and advocacy. We know that politics aside, it's about Utah students, and that's what we're about. And sometimes we get lost in, you know, the weeds, but we want you to know, at least as a superintendent from an LEA, and then I'll introduce my cohort here, that we see what you do and that we believe and fully support you as the lead agency in education. That's not disrespect meant towards the legislature or the governor's office. I think they have a role in that, but we see that you're doing the heavy lifting, and we appreciate what you do. And you get many calls, and can I just say I miss my Linda Hansen? I mean, she's not known as my Linda Hansen, but I know her as my Linda Hansen. So good luck on choosing a good replacement
Not
for
that
her.
it's up to us.
Yeah, so I know.
Not that we have one thing to say about it, but
Yeah,
thank you. and
but
thank you for
anyway,
the
I do want
compliment.
you to know that we watch that, we support, we cheer you on. We know that there are tough issues, and thank you for your service. So, my partner in crime here is Camille Knudsen. She's the vice president of our school board. President Manzione couldn't make it. She's in the Joint Legislative Committee over at the USBA conference. So I asked Camille to come with me, and she can address any questions you have from our board standpoint. But just in the interest of time, I know you've got a lot on your plate. I'll tell you the abbreviated rural/suburban legend of Wendover. And I don't want to embarrass anybody, and I'm not going to ask if you've been to Wendover, because there are other things to do besides gambling. And in a strange way, Utah does support education in Nevada. It just happens to be not public dollars, but personal dollars from people going out, if you've ever been out there. But we have a school in Wendover. Historically, I don't know if you know this, but we used to provide the high school, Wendover High School. And we provided all the secondary education for Wendover. Now, this is a city of roughly, under 4,000. And it really is one city that literally sits on two sides of a state line that's painted right in between, if you've been there. And historically, dating back to Larry Shumway, former state superintendent, when he was the superintendent at Tooele, they actually had some legislative discussions and with the state board about border contract with, will this district educate, will this district educate? Because Nevada came to us basically and said, we pay more student per pupil than you do, so we're going to send you a bill for our secondary students. And we then, in turn, had elementary students that were going to West Wendover. That's historically what happened. And then prior to me coming 6 years ago, when Larry Shumway was moving from that position to here, the proposal was presented to us to start paying a higher proportion from Utah. And my understanding, this is the urban legend, I don't know if it's true or not, but is that we said no, and the Elko district said, well, then we're going to build a school. So they built a high school. And we had to then build an elementary school. So right now you have a small town with 2 7 through 12 high schools and 2 elementary schools, really, and the town is only big enough to, I think, support 2 schools. So that's the challenge. I have reached out to the Elko superintendent for the last 4 years. They have a new superintendent this year. I'm hoping to, but we've reached, hoping to make more headway with how we can cooperate with, if you can't hire a French teacher because you only have enough kids to do one class, maybe we could help hire and bring some of those or CTE classes out to the kids in Wendover. So we want to be as cooperative as possible, but it hasn't been very fruitful. We were just informed several weeks ago, which is why we're here today, that the Elko County School District, their remote schools are all going to a 4-day week. Now, we have a remote, very small school at Vernon, Ibapaw on the Indian Reservation, and one at Dugway that's on the Army base that are already doing 4-day week, and we're already seeing some very good, similar to Tintic. We're already seeing some, Dugway went from an F letter grade to a D, almost a C, a few points from a C. And we've already tracking and looking at the data as far as not just parent satisfaction and student and staff satisfaction, but we're looking at student time, instructional time and travel time. And we do know that the UHSAA is looking at creating a region that of 4-day school programs that perhaps that could cut down on some travel when they reorganize that. So when we received the letter, the correspondence from Elko School District that they were going to a 4-day week, of course, we began to study and talk. The real problem comes down to trying to staff. I don't know if you're familiar with, we have an average of 30% to sometimes 50% turnover at Wendover High School. It's hard to maintain progress on school improvement and build up steam when you are constantly replacing and retraining your staff. If that district, which they are this next year, goes to 4-day week, when you have teachers, a lot of our teachers that actually live in Nevada because of the income tax, and the funding situation is quite frankly better for them. I don't think you have this same concern on the border. I don't know of any on the Colorado, on the west side, or even Wyoming that are that close in proximity. Maybe down in southern Idaho in the Washington district, there's some Arizona towns that are close, but it's very unique. There's about 90% Hispanic students. We've got some great programs out there, build your own teachers. The problem we have is kids think, gosh, why would I go get a degree at Utah State? And we're saying, we'll bring the degree to you, distance, and you can stay out there. Why would I do that to make $40,000 a year when I can work in the casinos for this kind of money? So we have a difficult time, but we realize that if we put more programs into Build Your Own and trying to grow that maybe we can get folks that don't just come into Wendover to get a Utah job, and then when something opens on the Wasatch Front because of, salary wars or whatever, or inequitable property tax valuation. We're a big county, 7,500 square miles, and most of that doesn't bring in revenue. So anyway, we're really concerned about retention of teachers. If teachers for the same or better money can go work a 4-day week, they're going to go. We'll have a very difficult time, if not almost impossible time, maintaining teachers. So we put our heads together, and I think we've given you copies of what our schedules look like in Dugway at the high school, what has been successful. We would propose that. Of course, we'll study it every year like we do when we receive accountability data and we look at school grading and things like that. But we really need to maintain that. I mean, the teacher shortage really feels urgent here on the Wasatch Front. It feels even more urgent in rural Utah. And then when you have a state and 2 schools that are right across the border that are more competitive than cooperative. Now, we are doing some cooperative stuff with kids and expulsions and our prevention programs, and we have a good kind of combined district prevention, looking at sharp survey data and that kind of thing, trying to provide social services. A lot of those come from here. Elko doesn't have a whole lot of resources. I think we're a little more resource rich with what we try to provide, but some of that comes out of Tooele Valley. There's not even a hospital in Wendover. They have just a small clinic. So we're trying to keep that viable and value added for kids that are there. Anyway, we would strongly encourage your consideration on the waiver for we're going to certainly meet minutes and hours as required by statute, but it's the school day requirement. We would like the flexibility of being able to move forward in a way that our board unanimously supported. So, Vice President Knudsen, anything else?
I think you summed it up perfectly.
Any questions of Dr. Rogers-Michael?
I read that the other side of the border, they already went to a 4-day week. When did that happen, and what was the precipice?
They
behind that?
actually are just, so Elko piloted this in some of their other nests, if you want, for the rural schools, and they haven't done it in Wendover, and we received notification in December that they were going to do it in Wendover. And they wanted it as a courtesy to give us the opportunity to consider whether that would be good.
Is next school year?
So it will go into effect in Wendover for the Elko County District for West next school year.
Oh, okay.
Great question.
Anybody else? Questions for Dr. Rogers?
They do have, maybe I got to clarify, they do have some of their district schools that are on a 4-day week, but we haven't seen it in Elko yet.
Oh.
So,
I had just one question. It's
Yes.
maybe in this material, but I either didn't read it or I glossed over it. Do you have any plans for the 5th day? Sometimes when there's a request for a 4-day week, there's a plan to have consolidate all their athletics on the Friday, or have tutors available in the school, or do you have any of that, plans for any of that?
Madam Chair, thank you. That's a great question. Yes, at Dugway, we didn't include that. We weren't sure it was required, but we can provide you additional information. But at Dugway, we use Friday as an opportunity. So once a month on those Fridays, the staff come in and we provide PD that's not pulling them out of the class. We would like to do the athletic thing that you mentioned, but getting other districts in UHSAA, the way the regions currently are set up, to cooperate with that has been less than successful. And so that's why I think UHSAA and the districts, Tintic, I know Tabiona's on a 4-day week. I can't remember the other schools. There's probably, I think, 8 of them. Anyway, they're considering doing that. That would make that a lot easier. We already have Dugway that's on that schedule, and Tintic, of course, and West Desert, they're already on that schedule. And so it's going to help us probably with some travel reduction as far as activities. I do know that IBAPA, those students who are on the reservation, have to come all the way into the University of Utah because that's their contract for medical services. And so the 4-day week for IBAPA has helped us with our student attendance because they're scheduling those appointments on Friday and then coming in all the way from the reservation. They don't have tribal medical health services out there on the Go Shoot. We have 2 tribes, one at Skull Valley, which feeds to Dugway, and then one, the Go Shoot tribe out in Ibapah. So that we have found works better for that community. And we're aware of the white paper and the research on savings, and you know, it's debatable, 1%, maybe 2%, if you can keep your buildings closed on that day. You can save on the utilities and operations, but you know, high schools are busy and kids are involved in all kinds of activities, and we try to provide music and CTE and all these concurrent enrollment classes and things like that. So it's hard to shut them down. And but the community was surveyed, and the parents and the students and the staff, of course, are very supportive of the 4-day week. So we feel like, you know, as long as we can guarantee those instructional minutes and hours, that the days is more immaterial to the real discussion, which is kids getting a quality education and spending time with instruction. So.
Board Member Davis has a question, comment?
I would just like to thank you both for coming and for the great things that you're doing for your students, and for trying to be flexible and partners with the people that you are near, and making tough situations more palatable for everybody involved. And would the chair entertain a motion?
Please.
I move that the committee forward a recommendation to the board concerning approval of the waiver from R277-419-4 as requested by Tooele School District Board of Education.
And the motion is that the committee forward a recommendation to the board concerning approval of the waiver from R277-419-4 as requested by Tooele School District Board of Education. Any discussion to that motion further? Anybody in the audience that would like to speak to that motion? Let me just amend this, and I think it's already required in what the requirement is, the document that is developed by the AAGs that then creates an agreement with the board and the district. I just want to be sure that at least within the next year, we hear from you. It doesn't have to be a big production, but just at least in writing, about how your test
Right.
scores are going, how the community, just anecdotal community satisfaction. If one of your prime concerns is teacher turnover or staff turnover.
Has that
What
addressed?
does that look like? So that we can evaluate if this is, because I'm old-fashioned enough to kind of not like the 4-school-day week, but I acknowledge you've got a unique population. And I've never seen a school district take advantage of this yet. So hoping that will stay consistent. But I would like to see some information, not even exactly data.
Yes.
And before we start another school year with the same
Well,
4-day.
Chair Lear, I can promise you that I think the agreement spells out that there's a formal review in 3 years, and I think we're back here, but we have no problem giving USBE an annual, we review that when we do State of the District, we review how those 4-day.
That'd be great.
Really, Tooele Valley is on the 5-day traditional week. It's really our nest schools. And we think, gosh, if charters are encouraged to be creative and innovative, then LEAs should be encouraged to be creative and innovative and meet the needs of that community. And it's really, I came from Idaho, and we had a lot of K-12 charters. There's 116 school districts, and half of them are smaller than 500 students. So there's a lot of K-12 4-day week schools in Idaho, and I've seen how those work. And there's some advantages and, of course, some challenges. But if the community's really behind it and they'll get behind, and they can make it work.
Yeah, and so I would just like an unofficial report, again, just written, if we could get that next year, and then we'll see how it looks, and maybe we won't need it again the next year. I don't want to make work for you, but
Right.
I also want to kind of keep tabs on how it
That would
looks.
be great, Madam Chair.
If that'd be great.
We were already providing Linda those updates, and
Okay.
we can continue to provide.
Thank you. Cindy, is that an unofficial amendment to your motion? I think so. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
So with the motion before us, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That was unanimous, I think. Thank you for
Thank
making
you
it
all for
fair.
your time and your service
Sure.
and what you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the local folks have it at least as hard as we do.
We're over at Little America with
And we will be there. So thank you. Thanks, guys. I think, is that all? Oh, we have one more? Oh, wishful thinking. Okay, one more item on the agenda, which is item 7.4. Oh, this is, yes.
It can be short, though.
Yes, but it might be short.
It will be short.
Item 7.4, the Charter School Task Force recommendation on a couple of items. So I guess, Jennifer, that's what you're here to speak, or you, is it Jennifer that's going to speak?
Me
I
and
lied.
Debbie will help.
I lied.
Yeah.
It's going to be Angie. No, you're just here to observe. And Debbie, if you're going to help, you might as well come forward now.
Sure, and I'll start by giving some background, and of course, we also have board member Cindy Davis, who
That's right,
participated on the task force, and she could probably provide just as much information as Debbie and I. But I'll give you some background, a little bit of background on the materials that are uploaded as backup in Civic Clerk, and then we can maybe answer your questions. It is very difficult to summarize 30 hours of task force time, especially when you all are ready to leave. So I will do my best. And we aren't discussing all of the items that the task force discussed, nor all of the items the task force discussed related to this specific recommendation. But today, Chair Huntsman and our leadership asked us to specifically start with one item. And just so you know, in finance, they're talking about the recommendation of the task force for LEAs to all report under GASB versus FASB. And so there may be other items that the task force recommended that will roll out over time to either law and licensing or finance. But today we're discussing the committee's, the task force's recommendation that charter schools remain as nonprofit 501c3 entities with statutory administrative rule changes, including, you can see them up there, 1, providing statutory clarification if there's a conflict between the laws governing the school as an LEA and the laws governing the nonprofit 501c3 operating the school. The laws and standards that govern the school as an LEA take precedence. And then the second one, codifying the requirement that an LEA may only spend restricted funds for their restricted purpose and may not be used for any other purpose, including for cash flow purposes. And the two documents that are uploaded, this just gives you a flavor of the discussion that the task force did consider all, I would say, these 4 general buckets of whether to make a recommendation that charter schools be structured as a for-profit entity, continues the status quo, nonprofit, 501c3 or other nonprofit, 3, a governmental entity. And you can see we even had a proposal from State Charter School Board member Phillips, which is indicated there. And then what we finally landed on, which is the number 4 category, which is nonprofit 501c3 entity with changes. Now, there are a number of changes in this column that we won't be discussing today, but I will just represent that I think at the end of the day, the task force felt comfortable maintaining the nonprofit 501c3 or other nonprofit entity status as long as some other changes were made. And so a separate recommendation you may remember is the one that you can see there under changes, the provisional charter for 3 to 5 years, which then becomes evergreen after that time. But for now, the other piece of background, and I apologize, I'll try to hurry, so I'm not talking too much. I have a tendency to do that. We did have a consultant from Colorado. He's an attorney who I believe works with a lot of charter schools in Colorado, provide a summary of other states and how they are structured, how the charter schools are structured in those states. The last page is probably the most helpful if you're trying to look at this quickly and digest it quickly. You can see it's kind of an overall list of how other states are have structured their charter schools. And where you can see Utah is about a little more than halfway down under the nonprofit organization with or without 501c3, but also public. There's quite a few states in that category. Utah's under the sole or limited purpose restriction. So we're in good company. There's many states that do something similar to what we do. And so there you go. I guess that's the background, at least with the documentation. And Debbie, it should be noted, helped create or populate. Yeah, there were a lot of people. She helped populate this one. So she and I were both there. And so anyway, I don't know if that's helpful background. We could start answering questions or see what you would like us to delve into.
So the point is, I think maybe, we would love to hear anything you'd like to add in 1 second, but the point that I'm kind of fixated on right now is we only have to look at 2 of the recommendations right now in terms of furthering them to the board. So it's not a huge bite that we have to, something that we have to attack today. But Debbie, did you want to add anything else to Angie's comments? Background.
Well, just on the second item, maybe, because I was just down in Finance Committee for the GASB-FASB conversation, which was fantastic. But they kind of talked about that second recommendation where one of the big concerns is about the restricted funds and how they're being used. And we already have a board rule that talks about you should be doing program and activity and fund accounting. That should be happening. So just so you're aware, the Finance Committee did talk about that. And that was part of their discussion, just barely as well, kind of related to that second item then.
Do you want to tell us what the outcome or the...
There was a great motion kind of a layered motion. Essentially, they asked staff to look at our board rule. It's R277-113-6 that requires that to see, do we need to enhance that at all? Because if we have the rule, why isn't it being implemented? Why are we seeing so many problems? So if the design of the rule is good, then we have an implementation or monitoring problem. So is there anything we can do to beef up the rule that would help with implementation and monitoring? So staff is going to look at that and come back, and then also looking to, I guess, yes, related to this, look for financial reporting purposes, call charter schools governmental entities, because that meets the definition of GASB, which means we would be going that direction. But it is tied, if you're looking at those definitions of GASB, it is tied to a structure a little bit. And so they're saying for financial purposes only. And there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still discussion that the board will have on this, but kind of bringing that forward for financial reporting purposes. They are government entities, and so anything that's discussed here with law and licensing, are there other things with the entity structure that you'd like to consider? Are there other ways they should be considered governmental entities, or is it, are we parsing things out that we don't need to? Anyway, there's some context for you about that discussion.
That helps us with our work, I think. Board Member Davis.
Oh, just to piggyback on what's already in rule and why isn't it happening? I mean, number two, it actually technically already is in code. So it's kind of more like an emphasis type of a thing than creating new code, at least on what I read, and maybe there's some slight tweaks there. But I will say that this all seems retroactive to me, because the full board has already voted to support the 13 or 14 recommendations that the task force made. So, I today just be comfortable having our staff start working on whatever legislation's needed for those task force recommendations.
That's.
The thought, we've already hashed it all out in full board, and then, but.
Maybe they need
But it's
another
okay.
item on our agenda.
But maybe there are
That's what we're looking
public
for.
members that want to have more opportunity to have a say, and so going along piecemeal is fine. And I'm hoping that Royce and Jennifer will laugh when I say this. It's just the thought of going through piecemeal every single one of these again gives me PTSD.
Yeah, task forces.
Debbie and I will just smile.
Board Member Cummins.
So similar to this question was the timing of this. So because this was already part of a task force recommendation and supported by the board, I'm guessing this is moving forward. So it wouldn't take another month for this to be added to a bill file, et cetera. Is that correct? Or what was the wording in the motion of the task force? Did it require that these things each be put on an agenda? Or were some of these automatically saying, okay, this is a concept that doesn't require the board to figure it out. It's not a board rule. This is a legislative request. And so can it automatically go onto our legislative request ticket, or does it take another board motion to make that happen?
And let me get the answer to that, Royce. I'm not ignoring you. Perfect peripheral vision. So Angie, do you want to first respond to that, and then we'll see what Royce has to say?
And I should have pulled the motion again, because at one point, I remember discussing with certain people whether we needed to make a second motion in that moment about either legislation or the board rules. I think that the intent was whatever doesn't happen in legislation this session, then we would look at what we could do in board rule related to those, and that those board rules would obviously come to committee and you would have an opportunity to discuss them. But I do feel like I remember the discussion, and I'm kind of remembering Board Member Bolter probably over here saying that she wanted further discussion of a lot of these items in committee. And so I think that was part of the intent that Chair Huntsman said we would have a further discussion of these. But that the motion also said that to give leeway to board leadership to kind of direct how those items move from here on out, whether it's board rule or in legislation.
The recommendations.
Yes, the recommendations, whether they needed to go through a bill or in board rule. So if you wanted to be overly cautious, I guess you could take a motion. You could make a motion saying we support asking staff to work on this, but I also feel like the motion you made last month, and as long as board leadership, supports us and directs us to that we feel like we could go work on a bill file on those items.
Just,
that
and
helpful?
Royce, come on up,
Yeah.
but Cindy, were you intending to imply or say that these would be the first items that a board rule would address? Not necessarily, just.
The task force put forward all 14
Right.
recommendations as a group to be considered.
Okay.
For
And
this
these
year,
guys,
for code
between
changes.
staff and board
needed.
leadership, they would decide which things are developed first, or? Is that
Yeah,
what-
and I think people are assuming that if there are code changes needed or board rule changes needed, that then when the language of those comes forward officially, then those would be discussed.
Okay. Royce, what do you would like to add?
Royce Van Tassel, Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. I will say essentially to this committee, what we did, the discussion we just had downstairs, which is that following the conclusion of the task force, a smaller group of folks have met a couple of times to say, okay, how do we translate that into specific recommendations? And Representative Moss has been very open. He was a member of the task force as I want to be the sponsor of that bill. And at the conclusion of the last meeting, which I think was Tuesday, is that right? Days get all rammed together here at this point. I just been in meetings.
Was that just, not 2 days ago?
2 days ago, yeah, Tuesday. But we essentially said, okay, we should do, let me think what the right order here to do that is. So the item on number 1 is going to be part of that, though Representative or Jim Moss from the State Charter School Board cautioned that there may be some limits to that since the laws that govern 501c3 are to some extent federal, and our ability at the state or state board level to change that is limited. But there are probably other ways that we can do that. And so the goal, the drafters are working on that. The question on that second point about spending restricted funds, as has been pointed out, board rule already does require that. And it's an open question as to why we don't have the compliance expected. But the group sort of said, okay, if putting it in statute gives that a higher profile and makes it more important to the LEAs, hey, we really mean it, then let's put it in statute. And so I expect that will happen. And relatedly, and I know that this was one of the items that Member Bolter was cared about last month, and she cared about downstairs. Part of the discussion was about what is the right way, if you will, to make that switch from FASB to GASB. And there are a series of standards that are promulgated by the Financial Accounting Standards Board and the Governmental Accounting Standards Board that determine when you use GASB and when you use FASB. And Auditor Dougal was very firm in saying the legislature shouldn't just willy-nilly say, you've got to use GASB, but that we should fit our structures into the framework outlined by FASB and GASB. And so the decision, as my friend Debbie alluded to, was that for purposes of for purposes of financial reporting, all LEAs would be a governmental entity, and that decision by itself fits both within the structure of GASB, FASB, and simultaneously says that anybody that constitutes a governmental entity for financial reporting purposes will use GASB. And so that those are, broadly speaking, the agreements that we came to, and they, I think, encompass everything that is in this as well as what was downstairs. And then a number of the other things we sort of recognized could probably be collapsed into some single pieces rather than in 4 or 5 different ones. So I think, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, none of us have seen language, but it feels like we have general agreement and that the language should flow smoothly once we get into the session.
Yeah, as long as there's no monkey business, so to speak. As long as we all stay consistent with the recommendations.
Right.
Thank you for sharing, and we don't need to decide the FASB-GASB thing. That's the Finance Committee's problem. But as to the others, thank you for that information and background.
Can I just
Yes,
make a comment?
please.
And I think as to what Royce was stating, the motion that they made in finance would essentially address both of those things. Because if, for financial purposes only, all LEAs, including charter schools, are governmental entities, then that solves the problem that these two issues we're trying to solve, which is we have charter schools that at times can say they're 501c3, or they could say they were public, charter school. And so you had an example of a charter school that was arguing that after 1 year, those restrictions related to funding were lifted. Because in the 501c3 world, you can, I guess, lift restrictions off of donations after a year. And yet we have financial requirements that say, no, once there's a restriction on this money, it's always there. And so I think the intent is for what the motion they made in finance would actually fix both of these. We wouldn't necessarily have to do number 1 or explicitly recodify number 2. And isn't that your understanding as well, Debbie?
Did you nod your head?
Yes, I nodded.
I didn't see
should have said yes, sorry.
Please note that the witness nodded her head affirmatively. Any other? Yes, go ahead, Brittany.
So what you're saying is there's nothing outside of finance that would make that delineation any reason? So nothing to do with program applications or anything like that? That there's nothing in those laws that would? So it's completely financial? Okay, that was my concern. So are there things?
Are you shaking your head no, Jennifer? Would you like to come and? Just for these first. Help us understand.
Number
what you're
1, because I don't want to, because if there's other laws that aren't financial that might have to do with an education agency, right? This is your responsibility as an LEA that would supersede the laws that govern the 501.
I think that there's also some issues that come into play during closure of how the school closes and how it can be closed when it's run by a volunteer governing board that may or may not completely disappear or not have. I think that there are other issues than just the finance, and I know that some of the things that were put forward was talking in a broader issues than just about finance.
That's a good point.
Is governmental immunity affected by that, by number 1? I'm not well, we'll see what the rule looks like, but I'm not in favor of governmental immunity being extended to charter schools, or, well, they may already have some degree of it. But
Closing.
no, and I was more thinking of eminent domain.
Oh.
We'll just have to see what the eventual rule looks like. Did you have something else?
I just had a question for Debbie, who was downstairs in that conversation. So we had talked about in the task force possibly rolling in a GASB type of reporting in a pilot type of situation. Was that discussed downstairs, or?
They didn't really get into, a pilot or what it looks like or what's the course of action. It was more, hey, let's have staff look at the rule. Let's see if there's anything we need to do there. Let's see where legislation's going. And over the next couple of months, that will unfold and we'll have more discussions about it. But nothing specific was really talked about or decided.
Thanks. Board member comments.
So I guess for the sake of
Doing what we're told to
formality.
do.
Yeah. I move that we add item 1 to our, recommend to the board to add item 1 to our legislative priorities, our policy priorities list.
Right.
And,
She
well,
just said one because we thought
because
that,
2, it sounds like, is being taken care of in other areas, that particular thing may not need.
and it's probably more nuanced too.
It's there, anyways. I mean, we can put both of them on.
Okay.
For formality's sake, because it's the task force recommendation, so I don't want to make it look like we're trying to disregard that recommendation. But put both of those on the legislative request, and obviously, as that process goes forward, they're going to find the most efficient way to solve that recommendation, so.
And so the motion is that the committee recommended the board to direct staff to create or amend a board rule or work with the legislator on a bill file regarding the 2 recommendations that are already have already been accepted by the board as task force recommendations. 1, statutory clarification about nonprofits and 501c3s as they relate to charter schools. And secondly, codifying the requirement that an LEA may only spend restricted funds for the restricted purposes and can't be used more broadly than that. So that's the motion. Any discussion by the committee that we haven't already? Yes, Pat.
So I believe the task force recommendation was just about statutory clarification, so I just want to be cautious that we're not adding that we're going to solve this in board rule, that this was a task force recommendation to look for the clarification in statute.
It does say or,
The actual,
the recommendation statute or board rule.
but that's in our recommended action, but the actual recommendation on 1,
The task
where, I'm
force.
sorry,
Oh,
am I
on
missing
1.
it? So 1 and 2,
I
from
see.
the task force, it was to seek statutory
Oh, I see.
clarification.
I apologize, you're right.
Okay. So I just want-
So the number 2 would be amended to say, for the restricted purposes, or how would it, where would you get rid of the or, Brittany?
So just in your motion, you were reading the recommended action, and so I'm taking out board rule and just saying that we're,
It's
you know,
just
going to
statute.
move forward with the recommendation from the task force to seek statutory clarification.
Okay, to seek statutory clarification, all right. Did you get that, Kathy? Does that make sense to you? Okay, okay. That the committee will seek statutory clarification to the 501c3 issue, or AAG, I guess, or whoever that light and knowledge comes from. So all in favor? So it's that's nobody's no, so it's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, and I think with that, anybody else from we're kind of losing our viewing audience, so nobody else has any. Everybody always goes like, no, not me, not me. Thank you. Thanks for your participation.